In the autumn of 1962, the rain over Lunenburg, Nova Scotia didn't fall. It pressed. It came sideways off the Atlantic, soaking through wool and wood alike, as though the sky had a grudge against anything that tried to stand upright. The fishing boats stayed docked. The harbor smelled of brine and diesel, and the particular loneliness that settles over a town when the season turns and the tourists are long gone. Doris Lennox had lived in Lunenburg for all of her 34 years, and she had never once asked for help. Not when her mother died. Not when her husband left. Not when the bakery she had built with her own hands, and her last $2,000 had its windows smashed in the night before the bank came to review her loan. She swept the glass herself. She taped cardboard over the gaps. She opened at 6 the next morning, same as always. It was on a Tuesday, the third week of October, that everything changed. She was carrying 2 boxes of unsold bread to the church pantry. Her ritual on slow afternoons, a habit her mother had started, and that Doris carried forward like a name when she found the man. He was slumped against the stone wall behind St. John's Anglican, half in the alley, half in the rain. His coat was good, charcoal wool, double-breasted, but it was soaked through and torn at the shoulder. A cut above his left eye had bled and dried and bled again. His breathing was there, but barely. Doris set the boxes down without thinking. She knelt beside him, 2 knees on wet cobblestone, and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Pulse, yes, slow, but there. She looked up and down the alley. No one. She looked back at the man, mid-40s maybe, square jaw, gray at the temples, hands that had worked. She could see that much. His knuckles were swollen, and one of them had split recently. She thought, I do not know this man, she thought. I cannot leave him here. She stood, tucked her coat tighter, and went to find Father Renaud. His name was Henry Marsh. She learned that much from the billfold in his inside breast pocket, which she checked only to find some identification, not money. She didn't count the money. She pulled out a driver's license from Ontario, Toronto address, and set it on the nightstand in the rectory's back room where Father Renaud had helped her carry him. You know him, the priest asked. No, Doris said. Then why? Because no one else was going to. Father Renaud asked no more questions. He was a practical man, which was one of the things Doris had always respected about him. Henry Marsh woke the following morning to the smell of bread and the sound of rain still moving against the window glass. He blinked at a ceiling he didn't recognize. His ribs ached with a deep, considered kind of pain, the sort that tells you something went wrong 2 days before you felt it. Doris was sitting in the corner chair, knitting. She didn't look up when he stirred. You're in Lunenburg, she said. Nova Scotia. It's Wednesday. He made a sound somewhere between a cough and a word. She looked up then. She had dark eyes and an expression that held no particular warmth, but held no cruelty either, just attention. The kind that came from years of reading people across a counter. Water? She asked. He nodded. She poured it, brought it over, held it while he drank. His hands shook when he reached for the glass, so she kept her hands on it too. Name? She asked. Henry. His voice was rough, like something pulled from a long way down. Henry what? A pause. Marsh, that the truth? He looked at her. Yes. I'm Doris Lennox, she said. You were in the alley behind the Anglican church on Pelham Street. You'd been there a while by the look of it. He closed his eyes. I remember the rain, that's about all there was. She went back to her chair. He lay still. After a while he said, I didn't mean to be a problem. You weren't, she said. Not yet. She wasn't being unkind. She was being honest, which in Doris Lennox's experience was usually more useful. It took 4 days for his color to come back and his speech to stop lagging behind his thoughts. A doctor came. Dr. Aldous Mackay, who had known Doris since she was 7 and asked no unnecessary questions, and confirmed 2 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and a laceration above the eye that had needed stitching. Henry had received none of these injuries from falling. That much was clear from the pattern of the bruising. He didn't offer explanations. Doris didn't ask. She brought him soup the first day, bread the second, a proper dinner of salt fish and potatoes on the third. He ate everything and said little. Her daughter Clara, who was 9 and had her father's reckless curiosity and none of his recklessness, had decided Henry was interesting. "Do you know any card tricks?" Clara asked on the third morning. Henry blinked at her from the pillow. "2. Show me one. I'd need cards. I'll get some." "Clara," Doris said from the doorway. "He said he'd show me," Clara protested. "He said he'd need cards first. Let him sleep." Clara considered this a reasonable deferral and disappeared. Henry watched her go with something in his eyes that wasn't quite grief, but was close enough to it that Doris noticed and then looked away. On the 5th day, Henry was on his feet. He moved carefully, one hand near the wall, but he moved. He found Doris in the rectory kitchen, washing up after lunch, and stood in the doorway with his coat folded over one arm. "I should go," he said. "Where?" she asked, without turning from the sink. "I'll find somewhere." "You have cracked ribs and nowhere to be," she said. "That's a bad combination." She set a bowl on the rack. "There's a room above the bakery. It's small. It used to be storage. If you're determined to not be a burden, you can carry flour sacks and sweep up in exchange." He was quiet long enough that she turned around to see if he'd left. He hadn't. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite classify. "Why?" he asked. "Because you need somewhere and I could use the help," she said simply. "Don't make it larger than it is." He came. The room above the bakery smelled of yeast and wood dust and cold mornings. There was a cot, a chest of drawers missing its bottom handle, and a window that looked out over the harbor. Henry stood at that window the first evening, watching the fishing boats sit still in the water, and he felt something loosen in his chest that had been wound tight for a very long time. He didn't know what to call it. He wasn't sure he wanted to name it yet. He worked as he'd said he would. He carried flour sacks without being asked twice. He swept the floors each evening with a methodical attention that Doris observed and said nothing about. He fixed the broken latch on the back door, replaced a hinge on the display case that had been squeaking since April, and rebuilt a wooden shelf that had been bowing under the weight of Doris's canning jars. "You didn't have to do that," she said, looking at the shelf. "It would have gone eventually," he said. "It's been going since 2019. Then it needed doing," he said, and went back to sweeping. Clara had decided, by the end of the first week, that Henry was her favorite person in Lunenburg, a position that had previously belonged to her teacher, and before that to the man who operated the ferry to Mahone Bay and occasionally let her steer. Henry bore this devotion with a quietness that was not coldness. He showed her both card tricks. He listened when she talked about school, and about her friend Rose, and about how unfair it was that the town's only movie theater only showed 3 films at a time. He did not offer opinions unless she asked, and when she asked, he answered honestly. "Do you think my mom works too hard?" Clara said one afternoon, perched on a flour sack while Henry restacked them. He considered the question with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "I think she works as hard as she has to." "Is that the same thing?" "No," he said. "Not always." Clara thought about this. She was sad for a long time after Dad left, she said. "She's not sad anymore, but she's careful." Henry didn't answer. But later that evening, when Doris came downstairs to start the morning prep early and found him already there, already mixing, he handed her a coffee without a word, and she took it. They stood in the kitchen in the gray pre-dawn, side by side, working in a silence that had stopped being uncomfortable sometime in the second week, without either of them deciding that it had. It was on a Thursday morning that the trouble came. Doris was at the front counter when a man walked in who was not a customer. She could tell by the way he moved. That particular kind of deliberate ease that is not ease at all, but calculation wearing ease's clothing. He was dressed in a good suit, the kind that is kept good regardless of whether the weather cooperates. He had a leather briefcase and gray hair, and he introduced himself as Mr. Gordon Pell. "Mrs. Lennox," he said, setting a folder on the counter. "Ms.," she said. He smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes and moved on. "I represent Meridian Properties. We've been in discussions with Lunenburg Savings regarding several commercial properties on Montague and Lincoln Streets. He tapped the folder. Yours is among them. I'm not in discussions with anyone, Doris said. You may not be aware, Pell said pleasantly, but there's a clause in your commercial mortgage, paragraph 14, subsection C, that allows the bank to initiate sale proceedings in the event of sustained income below a specified threshold. He paused. The window smashing last month was unfortunate. The insurance claim is still pending, I understand. You understand correctly. The bank has been patient, he said. But patience has a horizon. Doris held his gaze. She had learned, over 34 years, to hold her face very still when she needed to. What timeline are we talking about? She said. 60 days, said Pell. If Meridian Properties acquires this building, we will of course offer relocation assistance. I'm sure you will, she said. He picked up his briefcase, tipped his head, and left. Henry appeared from the back. He had heard. He stood in the doorway to the kitchen, flowers still on his forearms, looking at the folder on the counter. You don't have 60 days worth in reserve, he said. It wasn't a question, no, she said. How close? 30, maybe, if nothing breaks. Henry looked out the window at the street where Pell's car was pulling away. He came on behalf of someone, he said slowly. Properties like this don't get flagged by a bank. They get identified by a buyer first, and then the bank is encouraged. Doris looked at him. You know about this kind of thing. It wasn't a question either. Henry turned from the window. His expression was not the expression he'd been wearing for the past 2 weeks. It was older, heavier, the expression of a man who has seen particular kinds of people do particular kinds of things and has spent some years trying to forget that he ever knew any of it. A little, he said. Henry. He met her eyes. Who are you? She said. Not unkindly, not pressingly, simply, finally. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, someone who left a life he didn't like. What kind of life? He reached for the coffee he'd left on the counter and wrapped both hands around it, though it had long since gone cold. Corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, 15 years of it. I was good at it. Past tense. Past tense, he said. My wife died 3 years ago. Breast cancer. We'd been trying to have children. He stopped. Looked at the window again. After she was gone, I kept going to the office for about 8 months. Habit. One day I looked at a file I was supposed to be building, and I thought, I cannot do this anymore. Not because of her, because I looked at the file and I realized I'd never actually believed in what I was doing. I'd just been very good at it. So you left, Doris said. I left, he said. Drove east. Figured I'd stop somewhere that felt like it meant something. I'd had a difficult night in Mahone Bay and I was trying to walk it off when the rain started, and I think I chose a bad alley. You chose a very bad alley, she said. Something in his face shifted. The men they were connected to a file from my old firm. Someone I'd helped once, who didn't want reminding of it. Doris nodded slowly. She didn't ask more. He'd told her what she needed to know. Can you read a commercial mortgage? She said. He looked at her. I'm a corporate lawyer. Then sit down, she said. Let's see what paragraph 14 actually says. He sat. They stayed at the kitchen table until 11 that night. Clara had long since fallen asleep on the small couch in the back, with a blanket. Doris had laid over her without waking her, and the bakery had gone dark around them, except for the light above the table and the harbor lights coming through the front window. Henry read the document twice through, made notes in his deliberate, close handwriting, and explained what he found. The clause is real, he said. But it's also conditional. The bank has to demonstrate that the income decline is sustained, not temporary. The insurance claim pending on the vandalism creates a counter-argument. If the claim pays out, it restores your financial standing retroactively. The insurer has been slow. I can write to them, Henry said. Not as your lawyer. I'm not practicing, but as a private individual with some knowledge of how these claims should be processed. Sometimes the right letter, framed correctly, moves things. He paused. There's something else, Meridian Properties. I know that name. It's a numbered company. It was formed 4 years ago, and it's been acquiring heritage commercial property along the eastern seaboard in a pattern that's consistent with development speculation. If they're moving in Lunenburg, they're not interested in your bakery. They're interested in the whole block. Doris was very still. That means there are other property owners on this street who are being approached the same way, Henry said. If they knew what was happening, if they could present a unified response to the bank, it changes the negotiation entirely. I know every person on this street, Doris said quietly. I thought you might. She looked at him across the table. Across the table, this man she'd found in an alley 3 weeks ago, who was now sitting in her kitchen at 11 at night with her daughter asleep in the next room, and she thought about the way Clara had said, "He's careful," and the way he'd handed her a coffee in the dark without making it into anything, and how the shelf had been bowing since 2019 and now it wasn't. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "You didn't have to pick me up off the ground," he said. "I did," she said. "I absolutely did. There was no version of that where I walked away." Henry looked at her. "No," he said. "I don't suppose there was." The insurance letter went out on the Monday. Henry had written 4 drafts before he was satisfied, and Doris had read all 4 and said the same thing each time. "Send it," which made him revise again until she finally took the pen from his hand and wrote, "Send the 3rd one" on the top of the page and slid it back across the table. He sent the 3rd one. In the meantime, Doris made a list. There were 9 commercial properties on the block. She knew all 9 owners. She walked to each one on Tuesday afternoon, in the rain again, and by Wednesday evening she had confirmed that 7 of them had received visits from Gordon Pell or someone very like him, bearing folders and threshold clauses, and the particular brand of patient menace that passes for professionalism in certain circles. She called a meeting for Thursday morning in the bakery, before it opened. 8 people came. They stood among the bread racks and the flour bins and the display case whose hinge no longer squeaked. And they listened while Henry, still moving carefully, still with one hand instinctively near his ribs when he stood too quickly, laid out what he'd found in plain language without theatrics. He told them what Meridian was. He told them what the clause meant and didn't mean. He told them what a unified response to the bank would look like, and what grounds they had to contest the timeline. Old Mr. Arsenault, who ran the hardware store 2 doors down and had known Doris since she was in school, raised his hand. "Who are you exactly?" he said. "A lawyer," Henry said. "Formerly. You practicing?" "No." "Then why are you doing this?" Henry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because she picked me up off the ground and I had the particular skill to be useful." Those 2 things came together at the right time. Mr. Arsenault nodded, as though that were a satisfying explanation. Because in Lunenburg it was. The letter to the bank was drafted jointly, signed by all 9 property owners, and sent by registered mail on the Friday. Henry had also, quietly, sent a separate inquiry to a contact at the Nova Scotia Barristers' Society regarding the pattern of Meridian's acquisitions. Not a formal complaint, not yet, but a well-documented inquiry from someone who knew how to make documentation land. Then came the second knock on the door. It was a Saturday, just past noon. Doris was icing a batch of tea cakes. Clara was upstairs doing her homework with varying degrees of commitment. Henry was in the back, repairing a cracked table leg with the focused attention he brought to everything, when the door opened and 2 men came in who were not there for baked goods. The taller one looked around the shop with the particular blankness of someone cataloging exits. "We're looking for Henry Marsh," he said. Doris kept icing. "Is he expecting you?" "No." "Then he might be busy." She looked up. "What's this regarding?" "Private matter," the shorter one said. Henry appeared in the doorway from the back. He'd heard. He looked at both men without expression. They looked back at him the same way, and in that exchange of looks Doris read a history she was not fully privy to. "Step outside," Henry said to her quietly. "This is my shop," she said, equally quietly. "Doris, Henry." He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned back to the men. "Whatever message you were paid to deliver," he said, "you can deliver it here. I have nothing to hide from this woman." The taller one shrugged. "Mr. Calloway says you know what you have, and you know what it means. He'd like it returned, and he'd like your silence regarding its contents." "Mr. Calloway can read the letter he received 3 weeks ago," Henry said. "I wrote it very clearly. If anything happens to me or to anyone I know, the documents go to the Law Society of Upper Canada. Not the Nova Scotia one, the Ontario one, where Mr. Calloway's practice is registered. That's still the arrangement. Tell him nothing has changed except my address." A pause. The shorter man said, "He won't like this. He's made several decisions I haven't liked either," Henry said. "We're even." They left. The bakery was very quiet for a moment. Doris set down her icing knife. "Who is Calloway?" she said. Henry leaned against the doorframe. "A managing partner at my old firm. He was, running certain transactions through subsidiary accounts in a way that wasn't legal. I found out. I didn't report it when I left, which I should have. I took a copy of the documents instead, which gave me leverage and made me as guilty of bad judgment as he was, just in a different direction. And those men? Strongly worded requests," he said. "Calloway doesn't want this surfaced. He's not going to escalate." "Are you sure?" "No," he said. "But I'm more sure today than I was a month ago." Doris looked at him for a long time. "Were you going to tell me any of this?" she said. He looked at the floor, then back up. "I was trying to figure out if I'd earned the right to ask you to carry it with me." "You didn't need to earn anything," she said. "You just needed to decide." He nodded. Slowly. "I know that now." Clara came downstairs in her socks and looked at both of them, and then at the door through which the men had disappeared, and then back at her mother. "Why does it feel weird in here?" "It doesn't feel weird," Doris said. "It feels a little weird," Henry said. Clara looked at him with approval. He was the only adult in her life who would agree with her when she was right. "Were those men being rude?" she said. "Somewhat," Henry said. "Mom doesn't like rude people." "No," Henry agreed. "She doesn't. Are they gone?" "Yes," he said. Clara considered this resolved and went back upstairs. The insurance payout came in the second week of November. Not the full amount. There had been an adjustment, but enough to restore Doris's standing at the bank and invalidate Meridian's grounds for approaching the other property owners. The bank acknowledged the joint letter from the Block's 9 owners with something that was close to embarrassment and very close to a formal retreat. Gordon Pell did not come back. Henry wrote the final letter to his Ontario contact. The documents went into formal channels where they would move, at the pace of formal channels, which is to say slowly but inexorably. On the afternoon after the insurance payment arrived, Doris closed the bakery at 3, which she almost never did. She stood in the kitchen for a while, looking at nothing in particular. Then she put on her coat and her boots and walked to the harbor. Henry was already there. He did this sometimes in the late afternoon, stood at the waterfront and watched the boats. She had noticed. She stood beside him. The light was doing the thing it did in November over Atlantic water, going gold and flat all at once, making everything look both ordinary and significant. "I wrote to the Law Society this morning," he said. "Officially this time. I gave them everything." "Good," she said. "I also wrote to Calloway directly. Told him what I'd done. Told him the arrangement was over because I was done holding it." She looked at him. "How did that feel?" He was quiet for a moment. "Like putting something heavy down that I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it had weight." She looked back at the water. "What will you do?" she said. "I don't know," he said. "I'm not a practicing lawyer. I'm not really anything at the moment." "You're a very good baker's assistant," she said. Something in his face moved. "That's a small thing. Most good things are," she said. The wind came off the water and moved through the trees at the edge of the park and rattled the last of the leaves, and neither of them said anything for a while. Below them, a fishing boat that had been out since morning came through the harbor mouth, engine low, running lights beginning to glow in the early dusk. "I had a meeting with Mr. Arsenault yesterday," Doris said. "He and two of the other owners on the block are talking about forming a heritage preservation society. Formally, with a legal structure. They want someone to help them set it up." Henry looked at her. "It wouldn't be practicing law," she said. "It would be helping neighbors with paperwork." Arsenault said he'd pay whatever was reasonable. The others agreed. "You arranged that," he said. "I mentioned your name. They remembered you from the meeting." Henry looked back at the harbor. The boat had docked. Someone on the deck was tossing a line. "I wasn't planning to stay," he said. "I know," she said. "I left Toronto because I needed to be somewhere that meant something." "I know that too," she said. "This place," he stopped, started again. "It's the first place in 3 years that's felt like a place and not just a location." Doris didn't answer. She understood the difference. They walked back along the waterfront as the last of the light went. At the corner where the bakery's narrow house attached itself to the shop, Clara was in the upstairs window, nose against the glass, watching them come. She waved. Henry raised a hand. Clara disappeared, and 30 seconds later, the front door opened and she was on the step. "I made cocoa," she announced. "I used the good chocolate." "That was for the Christmas baking," Doris said. "You'll make more," Clara said, with the serene confidence of a child who has never seen her mother fail to produce what was needed. They went inside. The kitchen was warm. Clara had used the good chocolate and, it turned out, also the good vanilla, and had managed to do something creative with the milk that required some investigation and, ultimately, a second pot. Henry stood at the stove and fixed it, and Clara watched him, with the focused attention of someone taking notes, and Doris sat at the table with her cup and watched both of them. There was a moment, not marked by anything, not announced, where the kitchen felt like what it had not felt like in a very long time. Whole. Henry noticed it too. She could tell by the way he paused for just a fraction of a second and then kept going, slow and deliberate, the way he did everything, as though being careful was not caution, but simply respect for whatever was in his hands. Clara said, "If you stayed, you could teach me the other card trick." "You said you only know 2, Doris said. "I know 3, Henry said, without looking up from the stove. "You lied," Clara said happily. "I reserved information," he said. "That's the same thing," Clara said. "Arguably," he said. Doris laughed. It was a small sound, private, the kind that doesn't announce itself. Henry heard it, and something in his posture changed. Not much, but enough. He stayed for winter. He helped with the Christmas baking, which was considerable. He shoveled the front step when the first snow came, and the second time, and the third. He attended the inaugural meeting of the Lunenburg Heritage Commercial Preservation Society in February, held in Arsenault's hardware store. With 9 chairs and a thermos of terrible coffee and a hand-drafted charter that Henry had spent 2 evenings getting right. By March, he had a small client list. 4, then 6, then 9 property owners along several streets who had heard there was someone who could help with paperwork and knew what he was doing. He charged very little. He turned nothing away. He did not talk about leaving. On a Saturday in late March, when the harbor ice had gone, and the first of the fishing boats were heading out again, Henry came downstairs to the bakery before dawn, and found Doris already at the counter, the same as always. Hands in dough, the same as always. "He put the kettle on," she said, without looking up. "Clara has decided you should stay permanently." "Did she commission you to present this position?" "She asked me to bring it up casually," Doris said. "So here I am, being casual." He turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at her. She kept her hands moving in the dough, but her face had changed slightly. The careful part of it gone, or at least stepped to one side. "There's a house on Pelham Street," he said. 3 doors from the church. It's been for sale since autumn." "I know it," she said. "It needs work. Most things worth having do," she said. He was quiet. She was quiet. "Clara's right," he said finally. Doris looked up. I should stay, he said, not because you need help, because I know you don't need help, but because I'd like to be here, if that means something to you. She looked at him for a long moment, flour on her forearms, the smell of bread coming up around them both, the harbor beginning to go gray and then gold through the window. It means something to me, she said, and she looked back down at the dough, but the careful part of her face didn't return. The house on Pelham Street came off the market in April. It needed a new backstep, a repaired gutter, and a considerable amount of attention to the plumbing in the upstairs bathroom. Henry fixed all of it, slowly and correctly. Clara came over on weekends and offered assistance, which mostly took the form of commentary, and eventually became useful. Mr. Arsenault came to see the house one evening in May, poked around the kitchen, pronounced the bones good, and then stayed for supper, which Doris had brought in her old covered pot, and which tasted, Henry said, like something that had been exactly right for a long time. Some arrivals are dramatic. Some come in with wind and noise and the full weight of ceremony. And some arrive quietly on a Tuesday, in the rain, and settle into the place between things, between grief and beginning, between who you were and who you are still becoming, and take root, so gently, you almost don't notice until one morning you wake up and find that the thing you could not have named is now simply called home.